Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. 5090, November 20, paper 2-1, and we're going to discuss the section A in this. Now, as you all know, that this paper is for 1 hour and 45 minutes, and you have to be very careful in spending your time not on questions which you don't know, but on the questions that you know, and then you come back to the ones that you don't know. And then you think a little and then you write that answer. But do not waste your time thinking about it, writing some answer and then cutting it out, and then writing another answer and cutting it out. Well, you can't be doing that. As you all know, in section A, you have to answer all the questions in this section and write your answers in the spaces provided. Now, coming to the first question, the diagram represents what the human alimentary canal would look like if it was removed from a person and straightened out. So you can see here what they've given you a diagram. Well, you're supposed to figure this out, which one is what. So it says identify the parts A, B, C, and D labeled on the diagram. I think that was pretty easy because you can see this is the stomach. This is shape of the stomach is very typical. And then you have the intestine, and then you have the small intestine first, which this is the small intestine, and then you can see this is the large intestine, and then this is the anus through which the. So it's not to the scale as they've said here, not to the scale. So you shouldn't go by that. So as you can look at the answers, A was as it is esophagus, and B could be duodenum, ileum, or small intestine, and C could be colon or large intestine, and of course D, there's only one answer, rectum. Then it says state which part has the absorption of water as its main function. Now I know what would come through your mind is that when you drink water, well, it's absorbed where? It's absorbed in the stomach or in the small intestine. Well, of course, you've got to understand it. They're not talking about this water. They're talking about the water which is all the gastric juices which are used to help in digesting all your food which you have eaten. So that water needs to be absorbed because a large amount of nearly about more than about a liter of gastric juices are added to the food, and those need to be absorbed because we don't want to lose that. So that is absorbed in the colon. It is not what you drank, not the water that you drink or the Pepsi that you had. So that would be the colon or the large intestine, or even if you had said C, that was all correct. So for this 1 mark. So it's not talking about the water that you drink, it's talking about the entire process of digestion and absorption and where all the entire bulk of water is absorbed. Now coming to the B part of the question, seems a long story. Gastric stomach bypass surgery is sometimes used to help a person to lose weight. The diagram shows the result of this type of surgery. Now if you look at the original, now this would be the original stomach, which would be this part. Now they're showing you that there's an upper part of the stomach and they've put a connection between during surgery. So this is the connection that they've made between the stomach and so this is the bypass section of the alimentary canal. Now this part which comes out, this is the duodenum. This would continue like this. So this would be the duodenum. Now sort of visualize it, talk to this about yourself, just like what I'm doing to you. Then there is the stomach. This is the stomach which they've shown. This is the bypass section of the alimentary canal, upper part of the stomach. And then they've said a band. So there is a band here to prevent food passing through. So they have put a band here. They put a rubber band here between. So they put the upper part of the stomach slightly separate and the lower part of the stomach, and they put a little rubber band here. The digestion of one food substance is most likely to be affected by this surgery. State which food substance and explain your answer. You've got to understand the stomach has become smaller. So what is digested in the stomach is naturally, you know that the food substance would be protein. And explanation why? Because the pepsin, there is pepsin in the stomach which digests it, and now you made the stomach smaller, so that pepsin is not going to work on the food that you ate. So protein and explanation is pepsin or the mixing of the contents, or maybe mechanical digestion will not take place, and also the chemical digestion will not take place. So the HCl and all that will not be really able to work very profitably. Then it says suggest how this surgery may help a person to lose weight. And that's a total 10 marks. This was 3 marks. How would this help lose weight? You've got to understand now the stomach is very smaller. You can see here the stomach, which originally was this whole thing, now is just, this is only the stomach left. Originally this was all the stomach. So stomach is much smaller. Stomach will hold less food, reduced appetite because the person will feel full. That's called early satiety. That means that you get satisfied, you feel, okay, but now I've had enough food, I don't want to eat anymore. So less food will be eaten, less digestion, less absorption, lower intake of energy. So energy used will be greater than the energy taken in, because you will continue with your normal activity, but that because you took in less food. So then, of course, all your other fat deposits will be all mobilized and they'll be used up. So please understand the question. Not that this question is going to come again, but it could be any other sort of question, and you've got to understand what they've done. So you've got to take a little time in understanding the question and then, of course, solving it. So how will you word this? Stomach smaller, stomach holds less food, reduce appetite, not hungry or feels full. Food less eaten, so less digestion, less absorption, lower intake of energy. And then energy use greater than energy taking in. Basically, when do you lose weight? You lose weight is when you are eating less. So your all your fat deposits and all your stored energy is going to be used up. So that's how you're going to lose weight. You've got to understand how you lose weight. So you lose weight, either you exercise more and your intake is less, or even if you can't exercise more, your intake is so minimal that the body has to then use up all the reserves, and that is how you're going to lose weight. Now, coming to question number 2, corals are a collection of small animals living together in the sea. Their skeletons produce coral reefs. Okay? The cells of these animals contain microscopic green plant-like organisms called. So imagine the cell of the animal, and inside that is microscopic green plant-like organisms called algae. So now there are two things living together. Suggest the name of the process by which algae make their food and explain your answer. Process has to be photosynthesis, or the green plant and the chlorophyll or the chloroplast. Then the corals and the algae depend on each other to survive. Suggest how the algae benefit from the corals and how the corals benefit from the algae. So it is it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Naturally, the algae benefit because they gain carbon dioxide and they gain a protected or a sheltered habitat. How do the coral benefit? They gain oxygen because photosynthesis produces oxygen. So corals feed on the glucose or the carbohydrates and the food produced by the algae. Then the algae or the coral, you could have given anything. Respiration, gas produced. Respiration produces carbon dioxide. So that is going to be used for photosynthesis, or the photosynthesis produces oxygen and that is used by the coral. Basically, algae are unicellular plants. So they've given you a sort of a difference so that the child can see whether they can find out whether the student can understand that one is photosynthetic and one is an animal. And animals can only use ready-made food, and they respire and they produce carbon dioxide, while on the other hand, plants respire, produce carbon dioxide, but when they photosynthesize, the carbon dioxide is used up and oxygen is going to be in excess, and that's what keeps us all alive here on the face of this earth. So now let's see how can we word it. Now we worded it, the process is photosynthesis, the explanation is green, so has, because it was said green here in the question. So it has chlorophyll, or you could have said chloroplast. Then how do the algae benefit from the corals? Well, naturally the algae benefit from the coral gains carbon dioxide because the algae photosynthesize and it gets a protected sheltered habitat. Then how do the corals benefit from the algae? They gain oxygen because the algae is plant is producing oxygen, so gains algae is producing oxygen, so the coral benefits from that, gains oxygen, and of course it also feeds on the glucose and the food which is produced by the algae. Just like when we eat an apple, just think of an apple as an algae, we're eating it, so we're getting food, we're getting glucose and food, or we're getting, you can even say, carbohydrates or proteins. Coming to the sea part of the question now, an increase in the average temperature of the sea over the last 20 years has caused the algae to manufacture chemicals that are poisonous to the corals. So the algae, which was living inside the corals, would of course not manufacture chemicals that are poisonous to the corals. Suggest and explain. I always say suggest is the difficult one. The long-term effect on the corals and on the algae of this rise in temperature. Naturally, everything's going to die. The coral dies, the algae die, so the algae are no longer protected by the cells to live in, they get carbon dioxide, and the coral and the algae decompose. So basically, for 3 marks, you have to give me maybe write 5 points so that maybe you'd get one. The three might be, maybe one or two might be irrelevant, and you might not have worded it correctly. So be always careful. Write more. You have a whole lot of space here. You can even go beyond the lines. It doesn't matter. Nowhere does it say don't go beyond the lines. You can go beyond the lines here also. So, how do you word it? Coral dies or decreases or becomes extinct, or algae dies, decreases, becomes extinct. Algae no longer have the cells to live in, because if they don't have the coral, well, where are they going to live in? So they don't have a home to live in. And the coral and the algae ultimately decompose. So look at the 3 marks. So 3 marks, you have only 4 mark scheme points. So that means if you wrote any three of these, I'm not saying any one of them, you could have written them in any sequence, any three of these. So that makes you realize that you've got to be very careful in how you word your answers. Your English, your biological English must be very, very exact. Another rule that I ask you to follow is that you must read the whole question before you start answering it. Atmospheric air contains several gases. Complete the table to show the approximate percentage of each gas listed. 3 marks. Name a gas not listed in the table which will be present in a higher concentration in an industrial region than in the countryside. Explain why this gas will be present in a high concentration, in an industrial region. So explain, give me the reason. Then suggest why there is usually fewer species of wildlife in industrial regions than in the countryside. And this is a total 11 marks. So please be careful when you're wording these answers. So now this was of course a very direct question. How much carbon dioxide? Well, you could have said 0.03 because they've given the percentage. So you're not going to write the units again, 0.03, or it can be allowed up to 0.04. Then oxygen was anything 20% would have been fine. You could have said 21% also. So nitrogen is 78%. Anything between 70 and 80 was correct. Then name a gas not listed in the table which will be present in a higher concentration in industrial region. Naturally, that is oxides of nitrogen. Now, this is of course a syllabus point because industrial will cause oxides of nitrogen, or you could have said sulfur dioxide, or you could have said carbon monoxide. So you could have said carbon monoxide, all these were all allowed. So you could have said any one of these, and this would get you your 1 mark. Explain why this gas will be present. Well, of course, you know that. Why would this gas be present? Human activity, or you can say factories or cars or machines, and we burn fossil fuels. And the other word for burn would be combustion. So basically, that is what we have to talk about. It's human activity, burning of fossil fuels, which is going to be producing all these oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide. Then suggest why there are usually fewer species of wildlife. Why would there be less wildlife? You've got to understand is what? If there's industrialization, there's going to be deforestation. Then there's going to be air and water pollution. Then there's going to be less food for animals. Then there's people are going to dispose their waste like mercury, and all that is going to result in acid rain. So a lot of points for this suggest the C part of it, and it is all basically a chapter on all this on the chapter on pollution. Now, how would you word this? Human activity, power stations, and cars. This is one point. Then the fact that we used fossil fuels were used, and the fact that we were using in combustion, because either in the factory or in the cars, that's what we were doing. Then suggest why there are usually fewer species. It's air and water pollution. Why would fish decrease? Less food for animals. Deforestation. Why do we need deforestation? Why? Because we're going to build industry. So we're going to cut down the forest and then construct industry there. So we're going to have maybe a auto manufacturing plant, maybe something else. So it's all industry. Deforestation, we're going to build roads and we're going to construct buildings. So we're going to cut down all the trees. So there'll be reduced habitats for birds now, less birds. Then disposal of waste, that will cause water pollution. If we're going to throw the mercury of certain factories, throw mercury into the water, and that of course results in massive problems. Like if you've studied my video on that, the Minamata Bay story. So then, of course, all this sulfur dioxide and oxides of nitrogen is going to result in acid rain. Acid rain is going to destroy the leaves. So less vegetation, less animals. So you've got to correlate everything and put it all together. And that's how you're going to reach this answer. Now, coming to question number 4, the diagram shows two identical cigarettes before they've been smoked. In one of them, the paper around the filter has been torn away to expose the filter beneath. It also shows a cigarette after it has been smoked again with its filter exposed. Tar is the chemical which turns the filter brown in color. So they've shown you a paper torn away to expose the filter white in color, and then after the person has smoked, filter is brown in color. So this is before and this is after. Tar is the chemical which turns the filter brown in color. State two harmful effects of tar. It's easy, you can say cancer, it causes lung cancer, so it causes cancer, or you can talk about the other problems like it will stop the cilia from moving, or it will cause emphysema, Or you can even say about it weakens the alveoli and the alveoli burst, so less surface area for gas exchange. Or you could have said COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Or you could have said inflammation of the bronchi and the lungs and destroys the cilia. So any two out of these. Then it says name two other chemicals produced by cigarettes. So we've talked about tar, so we're not going to talk about tar anymore. So please, we're not talking about tar because I know some students would have talked about tar. Now it says name two other chemicals produced by cigarettes when they are smoked and for each state one of the harmful effects. So you could have said carbon monoxide, and you know what carbon monoxide does. It forms carboxyhemoglobin, and that of course reduces the oxygen carrying capacity. So red blood cells, so the red blood cells are going to be affected. So less oxygen is going to be carried to the body. So smoked and for each state one harmful effect. So less hemoglobin. Why less hemoglobin? Because you have to understand why are we talking of less hemoglobin? Because this red blood cell which has carboxyhemoglobin. This has carboxyhemoglobin because what has happened? The carbon monoxide has combined with hemoglobin to form. Now, this red blood cell cannot transport oxygen. So, less oxygen, less hemoglobin to the body parts. This is what you had to understand. For the second chemical, you could have said nicotine, and it's addictive, so it increases the desire to smoke. People keep on smoking, it's very highly addictive. Then, of course, it causes heart disease because the coronary arteries get blocked because of the fat deposition. It can result in increased blood pressure and can constrict arteries. Now, coming to the last part of the question, part two, describe how these chemicals can pass from a cigarette to the fetus of a pregnant woman. And there's 4 marks. Now, if you remember this is a syllabus point, which you must be knowing. I've discussed this in my videos. Now, first of all, you've got to understand is when a person smokes, I mean, especially if it's a woman who smokes and she's pregnant, so naturally she's inhaling the cigarette smoke. Now, the chemicals in that cigarette smoke are going to diffuse where? They're going to diffuse in the alveoli. Where are they going to go? They're going to go into the woman's blood. And then this blood circulates all over her body. So the same blood, when it reaches the placenta, these chemicals can go across into the fetal circulation. So that's why they're talking of the umbilical cord and then they're talking about the umbilical vein. Please remember, umbilical vein carries oxygenated blood, so it is the one which is connecting the placenta to the fetus. So from the mother's blood, these chemicals are going into the umbilical vein, or they've even allowed umbilical cord. So this is how you had to correlate it. So the chemicals, woman smokes, chemicals in the smoke is the inhaled air in which she inhales all this cigarette smoke. Then the chemicals will diffuse where? In the alveoli, where it will enter the blood. From the alveoli, you have the network of capillaries around the alveoli, so it will enter the blood of the mother. And this blood then circulates all over the body. So when it reaches the placenta, the mother's blood is on one side and the fetal circulation is on the other side. So here across the placenta, we always say the placenta, the function of the placenta is to transfer nutrients. But then if there's a chemical which is not good, that is also going to be transferred. And then it's going to enter the umbilical vein and it's going to reach the fetal cells. To the last question, question number 5, name the substance absorbed by plants using the process of osmosis. Now please remember, osmosis is, the definition of osmosis is only and only the movement of water molecules. It is not a dye, it is not ions, it would be only be osmosis is only water molecules. Now it says the diagram represents osmosis taking place between two sucrose solutions of different concentrations. So immediately think of your mind, there's a 1% sucrose solution and there is a 2% sucrose solution. 1 gram in 100 ml and 2 grams in 100 ml. Now it says identify E, F and G. So F was easy. Why? Because that's a partially permeable membrane. Partially permeable membrane. So F was easy, partially permeable membrane. But then you are going to be a little confused about the other two. Now, how are you going to decide which one is what? So what do you think is E? Now you have to decide between E and G. Either E was sucrose or E was water, or G was sucrose or G was water. Now I was thinking is E. Sucrose is a larger molecule, it's a disaccharide. Water is a smaller molecule. So that is how I figured this out, and I said, okay, E is sucrose and G would be water. So they told you this, that there's a partially permeable membrane, and they told you that there are two sucrose solutions, so 1% and 2%. Now let's look at the rest of the question. Explain with reference to the diagram how osmosis takes place. Now, so they want you to give me how osmosis takes place, and that was 5 marks. So please remember, I want 5 mark scheme points. I want you thinking like that. 5 mark scheme points. You can't be repeating yourself. You can't write the same thing and just say, oh, okay, osmosis is the movement of water, and the osmosis is when water moves. This is all same thing. So you have to be talking something very sensibly. How is water going to move? Now, basically, you have to understand is this going to be the movement of water. So, as the movement of water, water is G. So, even if you said movement of water, that's fine. You got a mark for that. And the water moves from a higher water potential to a lower water potential. Now, you see here you have a higher water potential. Why do you have a higher water potential? Because you have more free water molecules. I always say higher water potential means more free water molecules. So, less the solute, more the free water molecules. So, basically, it's going to move in this direction from G to the left. Now through the partially permeable membrane F, this is the partially permeable membrane F, and then sucrose is too large. Water, or you can say water is small enough to pass through. And so you have to talk about this is now of course going to be, you can also say in the end, you can say diffusion of water is taking place. But the process is, because it is going to be across the partially permeable membrane, is going to be osmosis. So for 5 marks, and then this will stop because there will be an equilibrium when the concentration is same on both the sides. So then of course an equilibrium will be reached. So how would you word it? Movement of water. Water moves from higher water potential to lower water potential. Water moves to the left through the partially permeable membrane. Sucrose is too large to pass. Diffusion of water, and stops when equilibrium is reached. So you see there were quite a few mark scheme points. There were about 7 mark scheme points, and you have to give me any 5 of these. That finishes this section A, and now I will continue with the section B and C in another video. So, and I hope this is helpful. I know your exams are next week, and so all the very best, and my best wishes with you all the time. Thank you for watching.